we're going to talk about kind of what we've been talking about, but more specifically manifest destiny and this idea of moving west. So it's going to be composed of several different parts. The first part that we're going to talk about is the Oregon country. Key terms: manifest destiny and manifest. Now, the Oregon country was between the Pacific Ocean and the Rocky Mountains. So just to give you an idea where the Oregon country, there's huge rivalry over this location. In the early 1800s, 4 different nations wanted the Oregon country. Obviously, the United States. We had explored all the way to the Columbia River, up and down the Columbia River. Lewis and Clark had headed over there. We believed that we controlled the Oregon country. Great Britain had also explored the Columbia River, and they felt as though they had some control over it. Spain, we know, controlled California, and they had explored up and down the Pacific coast, so they believed parts of Oregon country would have been theirs. And the fourth one, a lot of times shocks people, but it's Russia. Because Russia, remember, owned Alaska, what we call Alaska. And their settlements, they had Russian settlements all the way from Alaska along the coast down into the Oregon territory. Now, slowly, Spain and Russia began to surrender their ownership. In the Adams-Oñez Treaty of 1819, Spain had actually given up claim to Oregon. In 1824, Russia had surrendered its claim on all land south of Alaska. And that left just the U.S. and Britain to battle over Oregon. So if you remember, in 1818, we had an agreement with Britain for joint occupancy. In other words, both countries could have settlers there. In 1825, Adams had proposed that the two nations divide Oregon along the 49th parallel. Let's just split it in half. You can have the northern half, we'll keep the southern half. Let's just split it. But Britain had refused. And instead, the joint occupancy had been extended. Now, American settlers began flowing into Oregon. They are the ones that pushed this issue of the boundary. Just to give you an idea, between 1840 and 1845, 5 years, American settlers had increased from 500 to 5,000. The British settlers had remained at about 700. So American settlers are moving into this area, and they're moving very quickly. So this all leads to the concept of manifest destiny. In the 1840s, a newspaper editor by the name of John O'Sullivan had put into words what he thought was the national mission. In fact, he declared it was America's, and I quote, manifest destiny to overspread and to possess the whole of the continent which Providence has given us. Now, there's some key words in there. And the first one is providence. Notice that it is capitalized, so that means it's a name. And in particular, this is related to God. And he also says to possess the whole continent. He defines manifest destiny, basically, as God had destined the U.S. to extend its boundaries all the way to the Pacific Ocean. We were to expand from sea to shining sea, as the song states. Well, this became a battle cry, and settlers of Oregon insisted that the U.S. should have sole ownership of Oregon. They were U.S. citizens, and this became an issue in the 1844 presidential election. James K. Polk was the Democratic nominee who supported Oregon, and we should own all of Oregon. In fact, He said the line should be drawn at 5440 or fight. Now 54 is farther north than the 49th parallel. He was very, very stuck on 5440. Henry Clay, remember that old war hawk, was now a member of the Whig Party. He really didn't take a very strong position on this. Really hurt his political campaign. So a settlement was reached. Polk becomes president. Henry Clay does not. He was determined to make Oregon part of the U.S., and Britain would have to give up all of the Oregon country. 5440 or fight. Except, June 1846, a compromise is reached, in which the boundary at the 49th parallel is established. Polk did not get 5440 or fight. Well, during the 1830s, Americans sought to fulfill their manifest destiny by looking closer to home than Oregon. Much attention has also been focused on Texas, which is the topic of the next